Televisa presenta.
I mean, you're a rock star. Even your name is a rock star name, George Martin.
Changed my life.
Really?
And it did take me by surprise.
Like, it's not very common that a writer becomes a rock star, not like that. I mean, and being recognized in the street like that. And
it's fairly uncommon.
how involved are you in the TV show?
I'm involved to some extent. I'm a co-executive producer on the show. Mm-hmm. In the early seasons of the show, I was more involved. I wrote an episode for each of the first 4 seasons.
It's amazing. Do you have any favorite character in
Tyrion.
Game of Thrones?
Tyrion, but I love them all. They're
I
all
love
my
Khaleesi.
children. The good ones, the bad ones,
yeah, I know.
the gray ones. They're my kids, and
Do you feel different now that you have
Well,
to do something for the
feel
TV show?
pressure.
What do you feel when they die, when some of the characters die? Or
It's hard to kill them, but it's necessary.
No, when you sit to write, when is that?
I need to be at home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in my own place.
And what's going on in the United States right now? I know you have a point of view.
Yes, what's going on in the United States right now is very scary.
There's a lot of concern also.
Well, I certainly hope you don't pay for this stupid wall of his.
No. Well,
The one he keeps saying Mexico is going to pay for.
Dígalo aquí también por Adela.
Por Adela. Acción.
acción.
¿Cuánto de eso asume?
Es mi responsabilidad.
Aquí decimos la neta.
Sí,
Muy
pues.
complicado, sí.
Cuando estás con alguien, estás con alguien.
Otra vez al tequila.
Adela, contéstame una pregunta,
A ver.
solo.
Lástima que seas ajena. No me voy a quedar con las ganas.
Estoy muy enamorado de una chica y me voy a dormir con ella.
Callada, tímida, inocente, tiene la mirada.
Pues a mí qué me importa mientras me vale.
We are very neurotic people.
You are.
Qué feo, ¿eh? Qué feo. Pero tiene mucha influencia, ¿por qué no?
Me lo dijo Adela.
Bueno, yo ya qué hago. Hi. Oh, hi. Nice to meet you too.
Where I sit?
Yes, please.
So do you mind if we join you?
Everybody? You
No,
mean?
just he and I.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
Okay,
great.
is there any chance we can get a couple of chairs?
Couple of chairs.
Mucho gusto.
Hola.
Mi amor, el asistente.
Ah, ¿qué tal? How's your Spanish, George?
Non-existent. Except for food. I can say burrito.
Oh, and you like burrito? Okay.
Chimichanga. Taco. I
So
know all
be
that.
patient with my English.
Chili con queso.
Chili con queso. Well, that's not really Mexican food.
I know, but it's New Mexican.
It's New
That's
Mexican
where I'm
food. Yeah, I know. That's where you live, actually.
Yeah,
New
Santa
Mexico.
Fe, New Mexico.
Santa Fe. It's a beautiful place. I was there like, 20 years ago? And I was just...
It's hardly changed.
That's what's so beautiful about that place, no? That it hardly changes. Do you want something to drink or...
Sure. What do we have? I see a lemon lime soda over there. That would be good.
Sure.
Squirt or something?
Squirt, yeah. With ice?
No.
No ice?
We have Fanta as well.
Fanta is good, yeah.
Would you like ice?
No.
How do you feel here? When did you get here in Guadalajara? Yesterday?
No, Tuesday.
Oh, Tuesday. You've been here since Tuesday.
Sorry.
So you've tasted a lot of tequila, I guess.
A fair amount.
Different kind of
Not too
tequilas,
much.
but different.
And wine.
And wine.
Mezcal.
Mezcal.
Yeah, so.
Do you like mezcal? Or you?
I don't know. I haven't really had that yet.
Ah, no?
I think you tried it.
Did I?
One of the cocktails, yes.
Oh, in one of the cocktails, yeah. I've had a number cocktails. I wasn't sure what was in them.
It's a
Juices
very
and stuff.
different flavored tequila from mezcal. Yeah. And you'll stay till when? When
what?
are you leaving? Next
Leaving Sunday.
Sunday.
Yeah.
Today is a great day. I mean, everybody is just like.
Yeah, it looks
Waiting,
exciting down
such
there.
an
I can see a little from the window, big crowds.
Yeah, very big crowd.
So we need to leave at 12. Is that okay?
What time is it now? ¿Qué hora es? Okay, fine, great.
Yes.
Are you here with your wife? Or you,
No, I'm with
no.
Lenore. Did you meet Lenore, my assistant?
Yeah, she's back there. There's Loma.
One of my army, they've been, Wendelin and her crew have been taking me sightseeing. We had a dinner with the consul last night, and before that we went to the village. What was the name of the handicrafts place?
Tlaquepaque.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
That was very nice.
Did you find anything that you liked? Like,
I painted a skull.
oh, you
We
did?
visited a workshop, and they gave us all the skull to paint. So
Wow.
that was very cool.
Wow.
And we visited a former orphanage that's covered with murals. That was also very impressive.
Yeah, it's a very nice city.
Estamos listos, vamos a grabar. Silencio, por favor. Afuera celulares. En 5, 4, 3, 2.
Mr. George Martin, thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I'm such a
Oh,
huge
you're
fan of
welcome.
yours. Thank
I'm
you.
excited to be here.
Thank you. Have you been around? You've been in Guadalajara.
I got in on Tuesday, so I've been seeing a few sites. But today I start singing for my supper, signing and speaking and doing interviews. So
everything. There's such an expectation. Did you? Does that surprise you? I mean, like such an expectation and this the success of the books and the
it doesn't surprise me any longer, but it
when it happened.
It did surprise me 5 or 6 years ago when it really began to build. I mean, I've been a writer for a long time.
I know.
Sold my first story in 1971 and my first novel in 1977, and you know, I've been successful on my own terms, but it's only really in the last 10 years that since A Song of Ice and Fire has taken off, and then even more so with the television show Game of Thrones, that I've become this instantly recognizable
you're a rock
figure.
star.
And it's,
I mean, you're a rock star. Even your name is a rock star name, George Martin.
It's it has changed my life.
Really?
And it did take me by surprise. Sometimes I forget, and I think I can still live the way I used to, and then I learn better.
Does it bother you? Does it, or you've learned to cope with it? And
yeah, I have learned to cope with it. I wouldn't say it bothers me. Well, sometimes it bothers me. There are certain aspects. There are things I miss that I used to do. You know, when you're more anonymous. I was my last trip to New York, for example. I went to a bookstore that I love there in New York, where in my younger days, whenever I visited New York City, I would go to this bookstore. I would just spend hours there, you know, because I love to read. I love books, and I would spend hours. Half the day, I would browse all morning. I would pick books. You know, I'd leave with 20 books. And
around all the time.
Now I can't do it. I walk into the bookstore and I'm recognized, and someone wants a photograph and someone else wants an autograph, and then the next person wants an autograph, and next thing I know there's a crowd around me. So the days of me being able to just browse for hours at a bookstore are gone, but on the other hand there are some wonderful compensating advantages. So, you know, it's different, and I have to recognize that.
which is this library in New York? Where is it?
The bookstore?
The bookstore.
Oh, it's the Strand bookstore. It's a very famous bookstore down in Greenwich Village. They have a lot of used books and old books.
I think I've been there, and it's a beautiful place.
It's very, you know, 4 floors of books, a basement and all that, and it's really crowded because they have so many books. All the shelves are really close together, and you can hardly fit between them. And, you know, once crowds start together, it gets a little crazy.
Like, it's not very common that a writer becomes a rock star, no? Like that, I mean, and being recognized in the street like that.
It's fairly uncommon,
yes. It's fairly uncommon, yeah.
I mean, actors expect it.
Yeah.
When an actor becomes a star, because their face is out there, everybody knows what they look like. For the most part, writers, even very, very prominent writers, you know their name, but you don't necessarily know what they look like. But for whatever reason, everybody now knows what I look like, and so it's a different sort of life.
How involved are you in the TV show?
I'm involved to some extent. I'm a co-executive producer on the show. In the early seasons of the show, I was more involved. I wrote an episode for each of the first 4 seasons, and I was involved in the casting, and I would visit the set. I visited our shoots in Scotland and in Ireland and in Morocco and the island of Malta. We shoot all over the world. In the last couple of years, I've cut back on that. You know, I'm trying to finish the books. The television show is moving much faster than my books are. So
that happens very
they've caught up
often.
with me, and I'm a very slow writer, and the show is fast. So the show is doing their thing, and I'm doing my thing, and I'm not as involved as I used to be.
How many seasons to go? How many more books? 2 more books?
2 more books and 2 more seasons.
And 2 more seasons, yeah.
Although the last 2 seasons are going to be abbreviated seasons. Our previous seasons have all been 10 episodes. The season they're working on now, which is season 7, is only going to have 7 episodes, 7 hours. And then that'll be followed by a season 8 that'll have 6. So they're not full seasons would have been 10 each, and that would have been 20 hours. 7 and 8 together will be 13 hours.
When you watch do you watch the show? I mean, when it is aired, the TV show.
Sure, although I've seen it before it's aired.
I know, but when it's aired,
I've seen dailies or working prints or you know, various portions, and of course, if I'm visiting the set, I see the scenes as they're being filmed.
It's not an easy. I mean, it's not an easy book to take to a TV version. No, I mean.
No, in fact, I thought it was impossible.
Oh yeah, I mean, all the characters and.
You know, I, in addition to my novels and my short stories that I've been writing since the early 70s, I did considerable television work myself back in the 80s and 90s. In 1986, I joined the staff of Twilight Zone, the Twilight Zone revival on CBS, and I worked on that for 2 seasons. And then for 3 seasons, I was a writer-producer on a show called Beauty and the Beast. And that took me up to about 1990. And then for about 5 years, I had what they call a development deal, where I was coming up with ideas for my own shows and writing pilots and, you know, occasionally filming a pilot. But we never actually got a show on the air. And that was 10 interesting years. I liked working in television and film. But my ideas were always too expensive.
Yeah, exactly.
Whenever I turned to the script, you know, the network or the studio would say, "George, this is great, but it's way too expensive. We don't have the budget for this. Could you please cut, you know, half of the characters and combine the other characters? Could you, this big battle at the end, could we make that a duel between the hero and the villain? We have to cut it down. You have 12 matte paintings in here. We can afford 1. You know, all of this stuff." So when I came out of that in the mid-90s, when I went back to writing books, I was tired of that. I mean, I'd done it for 10 years. But I wanted to write something that was just as big as my imagination.
Yeah,
I didn't want to have to worry about budget or
as expensive
shootability.
as your imagination.
So I said, I'm going to write this epic fantasy series. It's never going to be made for television or film. It's too big. I'm going to have all the characters I want and all the settings. I'm going to have direwolves. I'm going to have dragons. I'm going to have castles. I'm going to have a very complex plot that's going to be hard to... Everything they tell you not to do in television.
Yeah.
And I did it all. And, of course, that's the thing that becomes a giant hit.
Wow, and such an amazing success, no?
Yeah.
It's amazing. Do you have any favorite character in
Tyrion.
Game of Thrones?
Tyrion, but I love them all. They're
Khaleesi, I love
all my
Khaleesi.
children. The good ones, the bad ones,
Yeah, I know.
the gray ones. They're my kids, but Tyrion has been the one single character who's been there right from the
All
beginning.
around, yeah.
Yeah.
And Khaleesi, what do you think about Khaleesi? I love Khaleesi.
Dany, yeah, she's amazing, and we have an amazing actress playing her.
Yeah,
as
she's
we do
wonderful.
for Tyrion. I mean, Peter Dinklage, Emilia Clarke, they're
And the character is
fantastic.
It's
I mean,
wonderful
we have some of the best casting people in the world, and I think the best cast in television.
Yeah, you were in the casting,
Yeah, in the beginning.
in the beginning,
Yeah.
not anymore.
I wasn't there physically because I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We were filming it in Northern Ireland, in Belfast primarily, and doing a lot of the casting out of either Dublin or London. So they would send me tapes, and I would get tapes of 20 actresses or actors reading, and I would review the tapes and then write long letters to the two showrunners. David Benioff and Dan Weiss are really the guys behind the show who've been there every day, working 24 hours a day, 9 days a week kind of thing.
Yeah, it has to be
get
like
the show
that,
done.
yeah.
It's really done amazing kind of stuff.
Now, tell me something, George. It's different to write as you said just now, as where your imagination goes. And now the next books, I mean, now you have, what do you do? I mean, is it different? Now you know the show, you know the characters, is it different? Do you feel different now that you have to do something for the TV show?
Pressure.
You feel pressure.
Certainly it's very different from the beginning when I was just writing these books and nobody knew about them, and not even my agents, until I had a few hundred pages in. But now half the world is waiting for these books, and every day I get people asking me, how is the book coming and things like that. So I'm very aware of that, but ultimately, when I actually sit down to work, that all goes away. I mean,
Okay.
then there's just me and the characters and the world, and there's just me sitting in front of my computer trying to get what's in my head onto the paper or onto the computer screen, as the case may be. What's the right word to use? How do I, what does this character say now? Is there a better way to say, a funnier way, a sharper way, a better line of dialogue? It's always me wrestling with the words and trying to make the world come alive and the characters come alive and figure out the thing to happen next, and the real world goes away. I mean, when the work is going well, I live in Westeros. I live in the Seven Kingdoms. I now have a whole staff of assistants whose main job consists of trying to keep the world at bay and handle all of the real life things, so I can just live in this dream world.
But there's pretty much of the real life in the novel, no? In your novels, there's a lot of.
I try to make it realistic. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I read a lot of history. I've done a lot of historical research. I draw on history.
It's very accurate, no?
Well, it's not history. It's fake history, but it's based on real history. I'll take an incident in real history and say this was an interesting thing to happen, and I'll turn it up to 11 and maybe reverse a few things, make it my own. I don't want to just duplicate actual incidents from real history or actual characters, but they certainly provide a foundation of realism.
There's a description of
of course,
Middle Age, for example.
The dragons are made
Yeah,
up.
the dragons.
No dragons in real
I
history.
love the dragons. And we met Khaleesi dragons since they were babies, and
That's
then
right.
now they are huge, enormous.
That'll happen with a dragon.
Yeah. What do you feel when they die? When some of the characters die, or?
It's hard to kill them, but it's necessary. I've known really since before I started writing the books who was going to live and who was going to die, at least for the major characters. I mean, there's a lot of minor characters, and sometimes, you know, I'm just writing a scene and I need someone to die, and someone dies. But the major characters, I pretty well know their fate and have known their fate since the early 90s when I began doing this. But it's still hard to say goodbye to them because they've become part of my life for so long. You know, every day I go there and I have another scene to write about this particular character, and you know, they're like a child or an old friend, and it's hard to say goodbye.
Yeah.
It's even harder, I think, since the TV show, because, you know, when the characters are just a character on paper, that's one thing, but once you get into the TV show, now you have an actor involved, an actual living, breathing human being, and when you kill their character, you're making the actor unemployed. So you may become friendly with that actor and say, "Oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, they're such a nice actor. I don't want to.
Let's not do
lose
that to
them."
them.
Yeah. But I have to be ruthless.
Make them suffer like that.
I try to give them good death scenes anyway.
Yeah.
An actor loves a good death scene.
They're thankful for that.
That's right.
They're thankful for that. Now, when you sit to write, when is that? I mean, discipline is very important for you writers. I think so. I don't know. How's your process?
My best times are in the morning.
The morning?
Yeah. If I'm going to have a good day, I need to have a good morning. I come over and have my coffee, check in with my staff, and close the door and start to write. And if it goes well, I'll continue to write all day. Sometimes it doesn't go well, and I don't have a good day.
And it
but
doesn't
if I'm not, you know, if I'm not going before lunch, I'm not going to get going. I'm not going to get on a roll at 4 o'clock in the afternoon or 7 o'clock at night. I'm not one of these writers. There are writers who can write anywhere, under any condition. There are writers who write when they travel. I mean, I hear their stories. They write on airplanes. They write in hotel rooms. They write on boats. Not me. I need to be at home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in my own place, with uninterrupted, with, you know, my walls up and distractions toned down, somebody else handling the phone calls, somebody else going to the door when somebody shows up knocking at the door, and
unexpected.
So I can just devote myself to
it's you and it's just yourself and the computer.
Yeah, ideally.
And is it? I read it's not a very new computer. I mean, not a very.
It's the same computer I've used since 1984. Really.
Really?
Well, you know.
It's not high tech.
It's not high tech. I do have a high tech computer that I, you know, used to visit the internet and handle emails and all that. But I go back and forth between them. My writing computer is not connected to the internet in any way, so
no,
I can't be hacked. I can't be, you know, I can't get a virus or anything on the writing. I can get plenty of viruses on the
other one,
on the other computer, because that's the internet computer, but not on.
It's just like a writing machine, let's say, no?
Yes, yes.
Like maybe you started like that writing, you know, the writing.
No, well, I'm older than that. I started on a typewriter, a manual typewriter,
yeah.
A manual typewriter at that. And then I graduated to an electric typewriter and wrote many of my earlier novels on an electric typewriter. But by the time I started Ice and Fire, I was on a computer.
Yeah, and this goes through all the way through your childhood. I mean, all these characters, and you always imagined characters. How was it?
Well, you know, I was born and raised in a little town outside New York City called Bayonne, New Jersey, blue-collar industrial town. My father was a longshoreman. We didn't have much money. There was a couple years of my life where he lost his job, and we were just getting unemployment checks. Never owned a car. The family never owned a car. And we lived in First Street, and I went to school on Fifth Street. So that 5 blocks between First Street and Fifth Street, that was my world. I seldom got outside that, except in books and in my imagination. So, you know, I would read comic books, I would read science fiction, fantasy books, and imagine other worlds and other planets and other parts of this world. And I would start making up my own stories, and from a very early age, you know, handwriting things about planets and Martians and knights and space battles. I had a toy castle with little plastic knights, and of course I gave them all names, and they fought battles and all that. So, you know, I think that was my imagination as a kid, reaching out to grasp a world that was bigger than the one that I actually lived in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when did you start sharing it with others? I mean...
Oh, yeah, at a surprisingly early age. At one point, I was writing a series of monster stories, and I would sell them to the other kids in the projects.
Wow.
But they would have to pay me like a nickel, and then I could buy a chocolate bar.
Your Milky Way.
Yes.
Yeah, the Milky Way. Where are the Milky Ways?
And the other kids did not read that well. So I would not only sell them the story, but then I would have to read the story to them and make all the monster sounds and, you know, all of that stuff. They were very short stories. They were like 3 pages long. So I did that
for... They were scary?
I did that for, well, you know, yeah, for a nine-year-old, yeah. In fact, I was scary enough that one kid started getting nightmares, and his mother came to my mother and said, your kid has to stop scaring my kid. He can't sleep at night.
No.
So she said, no more of this. I don't want you selling any more monster stories to the other kids. So that was the end of my first career as a professional writer.
Do you have any siblings?
I have two younger sisters.
Sisters.
They still live in New Jersey.
Okay, and you told them the stories, or you scared them, or how was the...
No, not really.
Not really?
They were off, you know. They were off in their own worlds and doing their own things.
And your mother, was she worried about you, or that you had such a huge imagination?
No, I think my mother kind of liked it. My father was more concerned, you know, that I think he would have liked me to be more like other kids and get out and play baseball and run around and all that. But instead, I was always the kid with his nose in a book. That was like my last name, you know, there's George with his nose in a book, or a comic book in the early days. But, you know, we would go to family gatherings, and all of the other cousins and stuff the kids would be playing, and I'd be sitting in a corner with my nose in a book.
Wow. Now, in Game of Thrones, do the actors have any chance to make their own, I mean, something of their own? And they give you ideas and new ideas or more ideas, or...
Well, I mean, the television show is separate from the books. I mean, the actors don't have any influence on the books, but certainly they have
well, the main characters, the ones they remain
on the character as they've seen in the television show. Now, some of the characters on the television show are very, very similar to the characters in the books, but others are not. For example,
and you're okay with that?
The German actress Sybil Kekeli played the role of Shay, a camp follower who becomes involved with Tyrion. And her take on Shay was much different than the character in the books. And, you know, I watched, and Sybil and I have become good friends since then. I just saw her a few weeks ago. She visited me in Santa Fe. But as I watched the first season, I'm watching her Shay. I said, "This is all wrong. This is not the way I wrote Shay. This character is not
in my book.
It all wrong. It's a different Shay." And then the more I watched it, I said, "It's a better Shay. Her Shay has more depth than my version.
My one.
Her Shay has more, you know, more emotional realism than my Shay. I mean, you know, Shay is a secondary, maybe even a tertiary character. So, in the book, she mainly functions as a foil for Tyrion. But Sybil is an amazingly talented young actress, and she took that part and gave it an emotional resonance and depth, and made it a person in her own right, whose own story was separate from, and not just a kind of small part of Tyrion's story. And, you know, that's what the great actors do. They make the roles their own, and they can take them in unexpected directions.
At the beginning, were you okay with that? I mean...
At the beginning, I was a little concerned about it, so I saw what she was doing, and, you know, her Shay is better than my Shay. But they're both dead now, so it doesn't matter. I'm sorry, I gave away. I hope there's people there who...
No, but they have a lot of us, no? And that was the thing I was talking about earlier, about real life, about us human beings. They have a lot, I mean, everything, all the characters have a lot of us, no? Like emotions and treasons and loyalty and...
Yeah, that's certainly what I try to do. I love gray characters. You know, I think too many movies and television shows that, you know, you have the heroes, you have the villains, good guys, bad guys. In the real world, I think most human beings are shades of gray.
Yeah, nobody's
we all have good in
all
us,
good
we all have evil in us, and sometimes the same person. You can do something very noble on Tuesday, and then Wednesday do something very mean and spiteful and selfish. And I certainly look at my own past, and there are things I've done I'm very proud of. There are things I've done I wish I hadn't done. And I try to capture that emotional reality in my characters, and to keep in mind at all times that they're all human.
So it's a very singular way of doing science fiction, no?
Oh, there are other science fiction writers who do it, but yeah, I think all the best writers hopefully approach it that way. I also like the fact that the books are not predictable. I try to make them not predictable, you know. As someone who has, for pretty much my entire life, had my nose in a book, I get very tired of the predictable story that we all read.
You know,
you've read that. You've seen the movie where you watch the first scene, you know exactly where the movie's going to go. You open the book and you read it, and you know exactly what's going to happen. You know, and that's boring to me. I've read those stories a million times. I don't need to read them again. I want to read a story that surprises me and takes me in places that I haven't been before, and a story that it wakens emotions in me and involves me emotionally in the life and death of those characters, and that's what I strive to do as a writer. I don't know that I always succeed, but that's certainly my goal.
What do you read? What kind of books do you read nowadays?
Oh, I read all sorts of books. I read, of course, a lot of science fiction and fantasy. I love history. I read popular history. I read historical fiction. I love murder mysteries. I read some literary fiction. I just finished a book by Emily St. John Mandel, which was, she's an American writer who did a excellent science fiction book a couple years ago, but which I'd read and talked about on my blog, Station 11. But before that, she'd done 3 other novels, which I'd never read. So she recently came to Santa Fe and appeared at my movie theater. I own a small cinema in Santa Fe, a little art house called the Jean Cocteau Cinema.
Wow.
It's a movie theater and a bookstore. So we have author events. We have authors in, and sometimes I interview them, and you know, and they sign books for people. So you know, you can always go up to the Jean Cocteau Cinema website and get autographed books. My books autographed, but also all of the writers we have in, Michael Chabon and Dennis Lehane and Emily St. John Mandel, and you know, we Pat Conroy came there. I was very privileged to meet him. He died unfortunately last year, but amazing writer. And we have a couple of these author events every month, so I read the books of whoever's coming in. Mostly I know them ahead of time, but and then we do an interview or a discussion of their books, and they sign things for the people, so that's always fun.
Yeah, you enjoy that?
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And when you read fantasy, what do you think about the other writers who write fantasy or science fiction?
It's the same thing as anything. I mean, some are good, and some are mediocre, and some are not very good. But this is a golden age for fantasy. I mean, it's not just me by any means. There are some other people out there who are just amazing. Patrick Rothfuss, Scott Lynch, Daniel Abraham, the whole generation, Robin Hobb, of people who are doing epic fantasy and doing some very cool and innovative and interesting things with it, and more of them coming along every year. We're also seeing a growing diversity in fantasy. Mm-hmm. Because I think for most of its recent history, ever since Tolkien, it's primarily been written by white men, but that's starting to change. More and more women are writing epic fantasy, and we're getting some African Americans and Hispanic authors and other people who are moving into fantasy. Asians are doing it. Ken Liu, Asian American writer, has done an amazing series that he's kicked off with. So you're getting a lot of different voices and a lot of different looks in fantasy.
And you get together like once in a while. There are conventions and.
Yeah,
do you assist?
Science fiction and fantasy has this whole subculture that's existed since the 1930s of these conventions that are held. There's one big one which is called WorldCon. It moves around the world, really.
All over?
All over, a different city every year. It's held usually in August or September, and in a different city every year. Last year it was in Kansas City. This year coming up, it'll be in Helsinki, Finland. And
are you going to attend?
That's where they give the Hugo Award, which is the most prestigious award for a science fiction or fantasy writer. That's sort of the Oscar of science fiction. And yeah, hundreds of writers attend that. Editors from all over the world attend that, as well as thousands of fans. So yeah, I will be in Helsinki to attend that. I've been going to WorldCon since 1971, so I almost never miss it.
Wow. Is it fun? I mean, to meet everybody? And
it is fun. Yeah, it's great. There are parties and panel discussions, and I give readings from my work, and the other writers give readings too. It's actually the best place if a reader, for whatever reason, wants to meet a writer. A science fiction convention is the best place to do it because. You can come to a book signing and you can get your book signed, but the crowds there are usually very, very big, especially for an author who's very well known. So you can stand in line for hours, and then you get 10 seconds when you get to the front of the line. Hi, how are you? Here's your book. Next, how are you? And you have to do it that way.
Yeah, there's no other way to do it.
So many people in line, but. At a science fiction convention, it's much more congenial. People sit around the bar for hours and talking, and you can come up and sit down and
talk to them.
Talk to them, buy them a drink, whatever. Writers like it when you buy them drinks in bars, especially the writers who aren't that well known yet.
Now, what do you think?
At my point, I can buy my own drinks. But there were times in the 70s and 80s when I wasn't so well known, where somebody came up to me and wanted to buy me a drink.
Yeah.
Talk about my latest short story. It was a great thrill to me.
Now, you've been making a lot of money. What do you think about that also? I mean...
That's good.
I like that. That's good, I mean. But lots of money they should have paid you.
That enables me to do things like buying movie theaters and reopening them and, hiring my assistants and so forth. So it's nice to have that resource.
What do you think about Bob Dylan winning the Nobel Literature?
I think it's great. I think it's great. He's, he's a poet. And as long as they give the Nobel to poets, then I think he qualifies. Just because you set his poetry to music doesn't make it any less poetry. They should give it to more rock stars.
Yeah, well, it's the lyrics, so what matters, no? At the end, yeah. Is there anybody that reads your whatever you're writing, the first one ever, like your wife, for example? You give what you're writing to her, or no? So what matters, no? At the end, yeah. Is there anybody that reads your whatever you're writing, the first one ever, like your wife, for example? You give what you're writing to her, or no?
Well, I don't let anybody read.
Nobody.
When I'm writing, when it's finished, my wife Paris is usually the first one to read it. I'll print off like 3 copies of the manuscript and send one to my editor and one to my British editor.
But already finished?
And one to Paris. Only one's finished.
Already finished.
Yes.
Also,
I mean, it's finished, but it's not finished. There's an editing stage that takes place.
Yeah,
so I finish it, send it off, and then my editor reads it and gets back and wants changes, and I make changes. I do rewrites. I do polishes, but
when your
wife,
wife
of course, I rewrite constantly when I'm doing it. So that process for me is not as big as it is for some other writers. So.
Paris doesn't ask you, how is it going? Let me read to me.
No.
No?
No.
She knows she doesn't have to do that. Now, what do you think of what you're doing today in Guadalajara in this, it's called the Feria Internacional del Libro, and there's so much expectation
I'm looking forward to it. It should be fun. I mean, I have the signing tomorrow, which is...
That's going to be tomorrow.
Yeah, that's tomorrow, and that's the grueling part. I mean, I enjoy that. I like meeting my fans, but
even if it's
I have
just
reached a stage. You know, there was a stage before the show. The books were bestsellers, so I would get big crowds for signing. But big in those days meant hundreds, and that was still nice. I could, you know, you could talk to them, talk to the readers when they come up, give them 5 minutes instead of 5 seconds, and it was pleasant. These days, the crowds are so big that I can't do that anymore. So, you know, we're signing 500 books, which I can do in 90 minutes. But that's really all I can do, and I mean, I suppose I could sign 5,000 books, but it would kill me. That's too grueling. So I know the fans love it, and I do these signings mostly for them, for the people who are lucky enough to get a signed book. And I know others will be disappointed because they can't get a signed book. It's not something that I enjoy myself anymore because it's too fast. It's you know, physically grueling, and it's a little wearing.
And it's exhausting, and you don't get to know nobody.
Right. Yeah. But you know, it comes
part
with
of
the
it.
territory. It's part of the job.
It's part of the job.
Part of the job here. So and it's nice to be here. This is my first real trip to Mexico. Oddly enough, I've lived in New Mexico since 1979, but I've never made it down to Old Mexico before, aside from a few hours in Juarez once when I was in El Paso.
And that's it?
That's it,
So this is your first time to Mexico?
This is the first time, yeah.
Yeah, and you haven't visited Mexico City?
No,
You've never been?
Never.
Ah, are you going to stay in Mexico City? Are you going to...
Not this trip.
Not this trip.
I have to get back.
You have to come back.
Yeah, that's what everyone is telling me.
And we have to go and see everything, what's going on in Santa Fe. And what's going on in the United States right now. I know you have a point of view.
Yes, what's going on in the United States right now is very scary. I know a lot of people from my travels all around the world who are very concerned about what's happening, and certainly Americans are concerned about what's happening. And
but they voted this guy.
Well, some people did. He actually lost by 2.5 million votes.
The popular votes. Yeah.
The popular vote, but because of the breakdown of the Electoral College, he will be the president, just as George Bush became the president, even though Al Gore won the popular vote.
Yeah.
So, and we'll have to see from there, but I'm very concerned about it.
What do you expect? I mean, are you really concerned? What do you expect? What would we expect? And we Mexicans, I mean, there's a lot of concern also.
Well, I certainly hope you don't pay for this stupid wall of his.
No. Well,
the one he keeps saying Mexico is going to pay for. I think Mexico needs to say, hell no, we're not going to do
hell
that.
No.
You're not going to get a peso from us. And, you know, it's a repugnant idea. You know, I've talked about it on my blog.
I know.
The importance of immigration to the United States. The United States is a country built on immigrants.
On immigration. Yeah.
The only people who really have any moral right to say, get rid of all these immigrants are the Indians, the Native Americans. They have a legitimate grievance.
And that's it. That's about it.
Everybody else who came in was an immigrant, and then later someone else came in, and they were all upset about, oh, this new group is bad. Oh, we were good, our group. Now, I'm a typical American mongrel. I mean, I have Irish and Irish, French, and English on my mother's side. On my father's side, I have Welsh, German, and Italian. You know, Martin itself only goes back 2 generations. It was originally Massacola from Italy and got changed in Ellis Island to make it more American. I'm a thoroughgoing mongrel, and I believe in immigrants. Immigrants have made the United States great. And every immigrant wave that has come in has faced discrimination and hostility. But I believe in the words that are written on the Statue of Liberty, you know. I lift my lamp beside the golden door, you know. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. And the kind of hostility that Trump has given voice to, this anti-immigrant hostility, is the antithesis of that. You know,
messages, yeah.
This guy has no right to even visit the Statue of Liberty because he represents something very, very different. And of course, the 2 immigrant groups now who are bearing the brunt of this anti-immigrant fever are Mexicans and Hispanics in general. And also there's the huge controversy of the Syrian refugees and how many Syrian refugees are we going to take? And, you know, they're mostly women and children, you know, some men who are trying to get away from a horrible war. They're not ISIS, they're fleeing ISIS. ISIS and
they're escaping from ISIS.
The Syrians and the Russians together have destroyed their homes, bombed their cities to rubble. Some of them are on death lists. You know, they want to go someplace safe to live, and that's the civilized world, I think, has an obligation to find a place for them, including the United States. But
what should Americans do if he starts? I mean, I think there are many, like, control. The United States have some control of the president. But what do Americans have to do if he truly
Trump doesn't actually seem to understand how the government works. I mean, sometimes he sounds like he's going to run the presidency like he ran the Trump Corporation, where he gives an order and everybody does it. Of course, he doesn't own the United States, even when he's sworn in as president. There are checks and balances, but the Republicans do control both houses of Congress now. Senate is very narrow. The Senate is going to be like 51 to 49, or
the court, the Supreme
Court is 4 to 4 with a vacancy.
With a vacancy.
So, you know, he has to. Some things he can do by executive order. Other things, he'll have to propose a bill, and it'll have to be passed by both houses of Congress, and then there will be lawsuits, and it'll go through the courts, it'll go through. So I don't know. It all depends on how much he does, what he tries to do, how much support it has. But I think there are years of struggle ahead.
At least 4.
Yes. There will be another election for Congress in 2 years, of course. All the members of the House of Representatives are up for re-election, plus 20-odd senators. So we will see who gets elected then, and that could change the balance. But how much it will change it will depend on where we are in 2 years. Where is the economy? Where is what's happened in foreign affairs? What's happened in the Middle East with ISIS? Are things worse or are things better? I don't know. That obviously affects on how things work. You know, I do think it behooves writers in particular to use the skill that they've been given and to write and to speak out and to,
well, you've been doing that in your blog, and you're going to do it, and you're going to be active, and yeah.
Well, I'm not going to stop writing my novels in order to, you know, run for Senate or anything like that, but I'm certainly going to continue to make my opinion known. I mean, I hope that does some good. There are days I don't know if anybody listens anymore, you know, it just seems...
Well, they listen to you, they read you.
Everybody is locked into their own view, and, you know, you express an opinion and you get the people who agree with you saying, yay, good for you, right on, you tell them. And you get the people who don't agree with you saying, how dare you say that, you're stupid, I hate you. So
It's so
can you
divided
actually
and so
change
polarized.
minds with facts and rationality and argument anymore? I don't know, but you have to make the effort.
Yeah, you have to make the effort. George, thank you so much. I know you have to leave, but thank you, really, thank you very,
my
very
pleasure.
much.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Maybe we can meet again in Santa Fe next
Sure.
time in Santa Fe.
Santa Fe.
In Santa Fe, yeah. And enjoy yourself here in Guadalajara. There's a lot of tequila. You should try some tequila, make a tasting, and have a lot of fun.
I will do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a lot of expectation. Thank you so,
Thank you.
so much. Thank you, George.
Take care.
Muchísimas gracias a usted, como siempre, por su atención y compañía. Yo soy Adela Micha y hasta siempre.